I'll usually talk kind of loudly, so even if it's not coming through the mic, people in the back, yes, no, you can hear me okay? Okay, okay. What about the mic? Does that make a difference? Okay. I can sometimes move around, so I apologize. Just like signal back to the mic or something like that. And likewise, I can sometimes tend to ramble. So if it feels like I'm rambling, just, somebody kind of, let me know. So I'll try to pay attention. So anyway, where this is going is just about different ways of debugging. Some of it will be inside the Intel XDK, and some of it will be outside. And in several cases, I'm just using the XDK because it's just more convenient. It's not that you can't. Some of the stuff I'll be demonstrating in there you can do outside of it, so it's not a requirement. Much of the stuff I'm showing, it's just a little easier. That's all from setup and using it. But I'm specifically talking about hybrid mobile HTML5 apps, debugging those. Has anybody actually ventured into the world of creating an HTML5 hybrid mobile app? Okay, and has anybody actually had trouble debugging that hybrid mobile app? Okay, it's just about everybody who's tried building such an app. So it is one of, and the the original title says, could anything be easier? And the answer is, yeah, a lot of things could be easier. This is not one of the easy things to do. And even I'm going to show you a variety of ways that you can go and debug. Not any one of them is necessarily perfect. They all have kind of their pros and cons, but at least you can think of this as maybe a survey of what's available and what's possible and what might work for you. And you're unfortunately there's not like one single solution that's going to work all the time. So I think it's worth knowing about a variety of options so that you can make some progress. One thing just from the start, I'm just using an Android device because it is the most flexible and the easiest to apply a variety of these methods to. Though in some places what I'll be showing can work on other devices as well. Some stuff only works on Android, some stuff works on others. So I'll try to be clear about where those distinctions are. But the other thing about Android is if you've dealt with writing these apps for these web view apps is what they really should be called, is Android is the most difficult platform to get things working right. It's the least consistent across manufacturers. It's the least consistent across versions. In fact, with version 4.4, there was a massive change to the web view, and so stuff that works fabulous there may not work on 4.3, and then likewise on 4.1 it's a little different. When you get to Android 2, it's even way different. In general, I'd try to just say stay away from Android 2 if you can, and just let it slowly die a slow death. But if you can get your app working on Android, the last bit of debugging you might have to do on iOS or Windows 8 is going to be a very small amount. So basically I would consider Android to be kind of your lowest common denominator if you're using the native Android web view. If you're using the Crosswalk web view, which I'll show you, I won't show you directly, but there's some debugging there, that normalizes things a little bit and helps out a lot. In some ways it makes it better than the other platforms, but in general, if you can get things working on Android, then you don't have a whole lot of debugging left to do on the other platforms. Fortunately, Android has the most debugging options available. Oh, I got 95%. Oh, that other thing, that's a activity, and so I'm plugged in too, so we should be okay. So I'm assuming then that everybody knows what a hybrid mobile app is, and we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on these front ends. Is that true, or is there some? Okay, yeah. So there's that native web view that's in there. That's what your app is running inside. It's like an embedded browser on the device, and it's except in the case of Crosswalk, where it's a replacement web view. Okay, so that's the only distinction there. And well, hybrid extension, I just mean things like Cordova APIs and so forth. So those are things that are added on top of the mix. Stuff that's not actually in the web view, but it's in addition to. And so I'll usually refer to that as Cordova API. It could be Cordova plugins. By the way, Cordova is spelled C-O-R-D-O-V-A and pronounced PhoneGap. So if you haven't heard of Cordova, you've heard of PhoneGap. That's the same thing. And the hybrid part just comes about due to the fact that you're putting this native wrapper business around it to make it recognized as an installable app that you can throw into the store and that you can download and install on the device. That's all the hybrid part means, and it also acts as a container to provide the native parts to these PhoneGap or Cordova plugins. But in reality, your app is written HTML, it's JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and all your various assets that you need. That's what your app is. Your app is an HTML5 app running in that web view. It's got a little bit of native stuff on the side. If it's on Android, if it's on iOS, if it's on Windows 8, a little bit less there. If you go to Firefox OS or Tizen or Chrome packaged apps, there's none of that extra. There's no hybrid aspect to it. It's just a pure HTML5 package that's recognized as a runnable entity. And so the system actually will take it and say, oh yeah, that's an app, it's got a title, it's got an icon, I know how to put that onto the web view and run it there. But in the other cases, in the Android, iOS, and Windows 8, they don't have like a native web app format package, and so you gotta throw some of that native stuff around it. But that's all the native stuff does for you, is it turns it into an installable thing. Your code still runs as HTML5. It doesn't get compiled or built or anything like that. It just gets packaged. It gets assembled into that package. So that's a thing that people sometimes get confused about. Because if you're talking about a mobile app, you're going to have access to some additional APIs that you don't normally get in a browser. So on the left-hand side, this is a prototype of the app that this is an old prototype of the app that I'll be playing with for demonstration. On the left side, you'll see I'm actually running this little app. It's been designed so it'll start up in a browser as well. It's running a desktop browser, and you see that the area there is empty. That's because it's trying to call some APIs that don't exist in the browser. And these might be sensors, they might be contact database, they might be the camera, things like that. In this case, it's just some simple stuff. Likewise, if I stick it into a mobile browser, so I'm running it still in a browser, but I'm in a mobile browser, I still don't have access to this stuff. So just because it's mobile information or mobile APIs, just putting it in a mobile browser doesn't actually get you access to that. You need to have these extensions that there. Now, as time goes on, some of that stuff is showing up. For example, in many of the mobile browsers now, you get access to the geolocation. You get the ability to deal with the accelerometer and some stuff like that. But you don't have the ability to get to the contacts. You don't have, well, I think some of the newer ones you might be able to get the camera now. So they're slowly being added, but for the vast majority of the devices that are out there, you don't have any way to get to that stuff unless you package it up in this hybrid format. And so on the right-hand side, it's the same app again, and you see the stuff on the top is filled out because that only was able to get filled out as a result of running it in that hybrid scenario. So now that's not a browser anymore, that's in the embedded web view. Am I talking too fast for anybody to understand? So, okay. So again, we talked about the PhoneGap thing. So this is just a nice visualization of PhoneGap to take home with you, or back when you get to the bar tonight, so you can remember what it is. It's just filling that gap between the native and the web stuff, or if you don't like beer, it's an Arnold Palmer, iced tea and lemonade. So getting on to the task at hand, which is debugging. You're trying to basically combine what's basically, which is a web scenario where you're used to maybe using your desktop browser, and you got things like Chrome DevTools or Firebug or something like that you're playing with this native platform where getting to that is either impossible or very difficult, or so that it starts to create a lot of bad dreams or headaches or whatever you want. So I'm going to, as I mentioned, I'm going to use the XDK to do some of this. We've brought a lot of this together in there. I'm not going to do everything in there, but it's a convenient way to get in there, and it's a free tool that runs on Linux, Windows, and OS X. So that's the end of the commercial there. And these are just backup slides in case this other one doesn't work. So the first thing is, I mentioned that I've got, sorry, I need to put these on. It's even small up here. The first thing I want to do is I'm just going to run this app in the browser. So I've designed, typically in a hybrid app, you've got a little bit of initialization code that has to take place, which is unique to the fact that you're on a device as opposed to just in a desktop browser. So that's what you saw the little delay there was about taking care of that initialization. In this case, it's trying to figure out, am I on a device or am I not? So I've got some initialization code in this app that can figure out when I'm in one place or the other, and the app's been written so that it can run in either place. So it looks like, well, geez, I can, and so this is not a terribly pretty app, but it looks like maybe I can actually, run this thing. But in fact, these buttons, if I were clicking them, I'd be getting sensor data, but I don't have any sensor data to get here. And in fact, if we were to look at the console, I'm seeing I've got this thing littered with printfs basically, so that it's a little easy. But you notice I got fail here because I'm detecting whether or not these APIs even exist, and they don't. So this this scenario is great if I want to do things like check out my play with my CSS and so forth. But I can, and in this case I can actually use the debugger here to go through some of this code, and I can add a breakpoint. And why did my breakpoint not go? Well, in any event, I should be able to break on that. But if we were stepping through there, we'd find that there's nothing to execute. I can't actually execute that code. I can't do anything with it. So I can't really test that code, even though I've set it up so that I can run here in the browser. So this is not very useful. There is this nice little feature here where Google's put together this. I want this the other way. Sorry. Where they put together this nice little feature where you can kind of simulate touch and the size of the screen and so forth, so you can get some indication as to the layout and so forth. So this is pretty useful. Using it, if you write your code correctly, you can go and you can do some debugging in the browser, and you can get about like 80% there, maybe even 90%. It just depends on how much device you put. So you can do things with the layout and general pure standard JavaScript, but you can't get a whole lot further. I can't actually see all of this information down here, and they're simulating touch. None of this stuff shows up because none of those APIs exist on my device. So at that some point it starts to just break down, and I can't get very far. But it is a very useful place to start. Structure your app so that you can in fact run that 90% of the code in the browser, and you can run very, very efficiently there. So that's one, that's item one, if you will. Now another thing that can be done is, for example, if you're working with iOS, I've compiled the app so that it will run on the iOS simulator, and then what I can do is I can bring up Safari, and I can bring up Web Inspector and Safari on that app that I'm running in the, and in fact, if you could hear it actually beeped there. But again, a lot of these, if we were to look at the way the code ran here on this particular thing, it claims, according to my logs, that it actually executed the code, and if we step through it, it is actually executing the code, but it doesn't actually do anything, because if it was doing something, I'd have some numbers showing up down here, and I'm still not getting any of those numbers. So now I got this simulator that claims to be simulating an iPhone, and it kind of sort of simulates the iPhone because it actually executes the functions I'm calling, but it doesn't actually return anything useful. So now I'm not getting errors when I'm executing my code, but I'm still not actually seeing it. Let's say that I had this hooked up to some sort of little ball that's rolling around. I'm moving the ball as a function of how I'm tilting. I still don't see how that's working. It's not really helping me see, does this thing work? So this is a little nicer. It's a little closer. I'm getting a better rendition of what the thing actually looks like. I'm able to actually exercise elements of the code that otherwise I can't get to just in the browser. So this is kind of like a glorified browser is what we really have here with the iOS simulator. So it helps, but it doesn't get me a whole lot closer than I just was with the browser. So what you can do as a follow-on to that is, so the problem was in that scenario that I didn't really have any kind of simulation of these device APIs that were underneath. I didn't have a way to actually get meaningful data that would allow me to really test my app. So there is another approach that can be taken. It's a browser. So I'm gonna do it in here, but in fact, what we are using here. Well, no, I can't go full screen because I want you to see part of the. So here's that same app. And by the way, I'm using the exact same set of source code in every single one of these scenarios. I got one project with one set of source code. So you're seeing, I'm not. It's not like I got one set of source over here to show the debug. No, it's one single set of source code. So we're seeing it in multiple under multiple debugs, just this one code. Now, what you have, if you're familiar with Ripple emulator, that's what is inside the XDK here. That's actually what we're looking at here. So you could, in fact, set this up inside Chrome browser, and you'd see the same thing, and it would work the same way. So I'm just doing it here, as I said, because it's more convenient than doing it in the Chrome browser. But it's the same thing. There's been a little additional instrumentation done here, but largely this is Ripple plus a little bit. What I'm showing you here is standard Ripple stuff. So now I can actually bring up Chrome DevTools. So this is standard Chrome DevTools that I've got here. Let's look at, for example, you see as I go across here, and I can go and I can go and I can play with layout here. So I can do all that kind of standard stuff. And which you could do in the browser as well. But, effectively, that's what we are. We're in the browser. This is actually a Chrome browser. But what I can do that goes a little bit further is I can actually start simulating a device. So now on the left-hand side here, pretend I'm grabbing it and pretend I'm like tilting the phone forward and back and left and right. And you see my numbers are changing as a result of how I'm tilting the phone. And then likewise here, I'm going to simulate that little triangle is moving around. Now it's pointing south, which is 180 degrees. It's pointing north, which is 0 or 360. And it's pointing different areas. So I'm simulating that. And in fact, I can start up my geolocation here. And I can move around, and you'll see my location moves according to where I am on the map. So now we're over in the hills of Los Gatos or someplace like that. So now this is much closer. I can also rotate this thing around. It gives a couple different skins, which all it really does is it just changes the viewport. It's not really changing the device. It simulates the user agent and a few other little quirks, but by and large this is a Chrome browser running standard Chrome browser with Cordova / PhoneGap APIs plugged in the bottom, some of which are simulated, not all. As you see, these were easy to show visually. There's some others that are also simulated, such as Wi-Fi access, 3G access, the buttons and so forth. You can simulate, like the Android back button, you can simulate catching an event there. So it's quite a bit more complete. But it's still not a real device. This is actually it's an over-promising device. This thing has got the full HTML5 API in it that you would find in a current version of Chrome. So it does stuff that a typical WebView doesn't do. For example, you can run WebRTC in this thing. Well, if you take the typical Android or iOS device, it doesn't work. WebRTC doesn't work in it. So you can play around with it all you want in here and then put it on device and only discover, what? It doesn't work. So this is a very promising device that does not currently exist anywhere on the planet today. Okay. It's fun to play with here, but that's why you can't actually grab and hold it in your hands. It's not real. You can't pick it up and put it in your pocket. But you can do a lot of work very quickly. You know, in this environment, again, I've got my little debugs in here, and I can, let's see if I can set, let's see if this works. Oh, geez. Demo hell. Try it again. There we go. So we can even, you know, we got the full debugger, full JavaScript debugger here, which is nice. You know, I can single step through this thing and do everything I could in Chrome DevTools, because this is in fact Chrome DevTools. So so that's very, very convenient. If I don't know if you could hear, but the thing even beeped at me, and oh, this one's queued. It'll even vibrate. I don't know. Oh, did that show up? Okay, good. So so it's got and then here I've just got different audios. This is actually just using the audio tag, which, by the way, doesn't work in every, you know, version of Android either. So you might say, well, I'll just use audio tag, and no, not going to. So we've got, you know, API extensions there. So but this does have the advantage that you can go and change your code very quickly, restart it, retry it, and do a lot very quickly. But don't view this, whether you're using it here in the XDK or you've installed Ripple yourself, do not view that as how your device is going to actually work, because this is highly idealized. This is not how your device is going to actually work. Trust me. Just play with geolocate once, and it won't. So what I'm going to do, so you see, so everybody's familiar with how this app looks and works, because the next step here is I'm going to do on a real device, but it's a little hard to see. I'll try and hold it up so people can see, but it's small, and I got a camera. Maybe we can view it, but it's still kind of fuzzy and small. So one of the things that we've done with the XDK is we've added something we call app preview. So remember, the business about a hybrid app is you've got this native wrapper, and then your HTML5 stuff is inside there, and the native wrapper just kind of sets things up, provides some extensions, and gives and sets up your HTML so it's running inside that web view, that embedded browser. So it's the agent that gets your HTML5 running, being rendered by that runtime engine. So app preview, which is we have it for 3 different platforms, or WinPhone, 4 different platforms: WinPhone 8 and Win 8 tablet, iOS, and Android. When you load that onto your device, you can think of it as being a pre-built native wrapper for the hybrid app, but it's got a big hole in the center of it, and that big hole is where your HTML5 code goes. So it's like it's a PhoneGap app sitting there and just waiting for something to do. And so you've got this thing running on your device, and I've got it running on here, and it will then, that's not me, right? Oh, okay. It will then accept your HTML5 code, and now you can run it on a real device in a context that's virtually identical to the way it's going to be when you run it, when you actually build it. So what I'll do here is I'll run. So there's a couple ways to get to it. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, where am I at? So that the thing is starting up. Everybody can see this, right? Okay, so there you can see the app is there. So all that's happened is my HTML5 code has been transferred into that empty container, that empty native hybrid container. In this case, it's an Android container, and I can. You probably just see small red letters, but in fact, just like before when we were running it on here, they're changing as a function of my. Now I'm actually reading real sensors on the real device. So as I move this around, those numbers change accordingly. Like if I put the compass on, let me see if I can guess which way is north. I'm going the wrong. Oh no, wait, it was. It's like that way, I guess. Is that north? It's roughly out there, assuming that we got a reason. So I'm running actual code in here, but at the moment I'm just seeing how it responds. I'm not actually debugging it or anything. I mean, I'm to a limited degree I'm debugging it. So this is a very, but I can update this quickly. I don't have to go through a build process. I don't have to, you know, download, build, and download and so forth. I just connect, and I put this in this. How did I load it on? In this case, there's a couple ways to do it. In this case, I can connect to my account where I've either pushed it up to a cloud server and it pulls it down, or since I'm actually on a local, I've got a local Wi-Fi set up right here, so these two devices can see each other, and it'll connect directly to and pull it directly off the disk. And that's actually what I did here, was I pulled it directly off locally. Yeah, in this case I'm using the XDK. This particular scenario is unique to the XDK. There's others. PhoneGap has something that they've just introduced recently. Adobe has something, and I've seen a couple others out there. So it's not, this is not unique to the XDK. This particular app is tied to the XDK, so this technique is not unique, but it's probably less well known that it's available. And so the full PhoneGap core APIs are in here. One of the drawbacks is that if you added a plugin, a custom plugin of your own, that's not in here. So you still run up against this problem of, well, I can only go so far, my custom code I can't. So you would still have to put some feature detection in there to kind of skip around so your app doesn't crash, and you can at least, you know, work and debug with the rest. Any other questions there? The app preview app is actually an application that's in the store. Yeah, you got to download that and put it on, but you don't have to root the device. You don't have to. You don't even have to put it in debug mode or anything like that. So it's just a standard app that's just sitting there waiting.
iOS devices?
Yeah, there's an iOS version, and there's a Win 8 phone and a Win 8 tablet version. So, what's that? It's called App Preview, Intel App Preview. If you search right now in the store, you'll find it. No, you can't put a URL. So this is more the scenario where this is the app is all local. I mean, your app can talk to a server and transfer data back and forth, but the idea is not that you're downloading pages of an app, rather that the app is a contained entity. So you could start it up without an internet connection. That's a distinct advantage to packaging something up as a mobile app as opposed to just a mobile web app or a web page. Okay, so that's a distinct difference. Okay, any more questions there? Okay, so there is actually a way to get in there and do a little debugging, and I'll try to show you that. So let me stop that. And so this is going to use that same container app, that thing that's got the empty hole that wants your HTML5 stuff. So it's like a prototype Cordova app is what you can think of it as. It's a prototype WebView app, and that involves. We can bring this up now. Sorry, it doesn't make the text any bigger when I make it bigger. But the other way that you can start this up, by the way, is you see that QR code. With this app or with any scan, I can scan that QR code and it just gets a URL and dumps it into. So it's a little easier here to do it this way. But what I need to do is I need to add this script. So I've just modified the one index file on the app. And now I'm going to, so I'm doing this on the local, like I said before, I'm talking to it locally here because I've got a local Wi-Fi running, which allows me to see the app. And that script was a winery script, so now it sees this device. So as I'm just scanning the elements. You can see, I assume you can see this on here. Is everybody able to see that? And for the benefit of our viewing audience who's viewing at home on a recording, I'll see if I can, oh well, that's just not going to work, forget that. Everybody in the room can see it. So I am, you know, and I can do a little bit of playing around with styles here with Winery, but it's pretty limited. But what I can do is, remember, I've got these buttons. They're all, oh great, is that not working? Oh yeah, there they are. So I've got these buttons all configured with lots of printfs. Basically, that's just stuff in my code. So you see, as I push these, I get little messages about them running, and so essentially the console log has been redirected over the net using the Winery script. And this is an open source technique that a lot of people use. What I don't get is I don't get JavaScript debugging here. I can do console, and I can inspect variables. Like, for example, I've got a little variable here called that just shows me some times from the initialization for debugging some of the init code. So it did some performance counter checks on there, and I can run a function from the command line. Anything that you normally do from the console, you can do from the console here. So I have that ability, so it's pretty good. I can inspect the value of a variable that's available. I can't check through and see local variables. I'd have to console log them or something like that. But it is pretty powerful. It works really well in this scenario where I've got like a local Wi-Fi connection, so I've got very little lag between them. You can, in fact, do this over the internet. It's set up to do it that way as well. It starts to break down when you do that because the lags get in the way. If my app goes haywire, goes out to lunch, the Winery script also is hung. So if my app does something where it's hung, I'm screwed. I can't do much more with this. So in some scenarios, this is the only way you can go. For example, with Win8, it's kind of hard to do anything but use this Winery technique. Fortunately, the Win8 stuff works pretty good, so it's probably good enough for now. It'd be nice, though, to have full debugging. With iOS, if you've got a Mac, you can actually hook up to the device directly with Safari and use Web Inspector inside your Safari, talking to the device that way. Likewise, with Android, on a 4.4 Android, which is what this one is, you can do the same thing with Chrome. You can do remote Chrome DevTools, and I will try to show that here as well. But in addition, so Winery is very, very useful, but it does have caveats. No JavaScript debugging, just console, type interactive console activity. If my device hangs up on me, then I'm screwed. I got to go do some thought debugging, which is probably the best thing to do, or throw in some console logs. Yes. The XDK is just serving as a container to run this remote console. So I used the XDK because it was convenient, but I don't have to. I can set up my own mechanism to do it. It's just, for doing this, it's way more convenient to do it in here. It sets everything up for you, and the only thing it doesn't do is it doesn't throw the script in there, which I've asked them. We really should be doing that automatic. So. I started on this test tab, yeah, and then I just do the instructions say, wait, you don't have to. As soon as you're here, as soon as you can start right here, and then it starts working. It either works or it doesn't. In fact, you can have multiple devices running, and you'll see when you go over here, you'll see multiple URLs you can attach to, and sometimes it's a little confusing. And the other thing is you can bake this into an app. So for example, again, this is running inside that container, app preview container that's got the empty hole in it. So it only has access to the standard APIs. It doesn't have access to some custom APIs you might have added. So however you can deal with that, you can build an app and put the Winery script in the build, and then start it up. And you'll see it show up here, and you can connect to it and talk to it and do a little debugging that way. So it is possible to actually deal with, but again, you don't have JavaScript, debugging there. But it is useful. It's a very useful way to go. I won't show that inside a built app. Just make sure you yank the script out before you actually publish your app and send it to a store. You don't really want to leave that in there. It will affect the performance of the app, and not to mention it's going to raise hell. So that's a very convenient. Then so I mentioned earlier there's this thing called Crosswalk. Let me kill this. What I'm doing here. So Crosswalk is a replacement web view for Android. So what I'm going to show you right now, this is specific to Android, and it has to be an Android 4.x device, so 4.0 or higher. It's loading an alternative container. So this is unique to the XDK, and you see remote. So here's my app again, same app, same source code. Nothing's changed as far as the app's concerned, except that now we're actually running it inside that Crosswalk container. So if this was really some beautiful app, you know, it might look a little different. I'm not very good at beautiful apps, sorry. But I'm you know, working with the real thing. Now there's got, right for demos here, it's got one slick little feature here that will actually show what's actually on my real device. So it's just screencasting my device to the screen there. So for our viewers at home, they can actually see what's going on. And so again, oops, in response to touch though, I can turn this on, and as I find different, you know, different orientations, of course down here the compass isn't very good. Now I can try to do a geolocate, but we'll see if this thing ever comes up with anything down here. It may not, but it's starting to give some numbers. So it's and see, even as I scroll this, it scrolls it. So that's just a convenience for demo here. I'm not sure you would ever use that, because normally you'd have this thing hooked up. And by the way, everything that I did up to this point was done over the wireless. This scenario actually requires that I got this USB, this fancy USB cable that somebody gave me for a birthday. I gotta have a USB cable hooked up to it, because this is being done over the USB connection. But I don't have to root this device. I just have to enable debug. I just have to, in this case, I'm using another special container, so it still is limited to the core APIs. So again, there's that damn issue about you know, custom plugins. So I still have a problem there, but I've got full Chrome DevTools here, so I can, you know, I can add oops. I can add a breakpoint. In fact, there's one there. I wonder if that's where I think it is. Yeah, so if I hit this button here, oh, there it is. So now we're actually, you can see we're pausing the debugger, and I'm single stepping, and then I'm running. Everything is running on the actual device. I'm just debugging on the actual device through the actual device. If I, you know, I inspect, and likewise I can do it, you know, I can go and I can play with CSS on here if I wanted to, just like we did before. This is Chrome DevTools, you know, running remotely. So this is a really powerful debug environment. Now this comes to us courtesy, what I'm doing right now comes to us courtesy of Crosswalk, which is again Android 4.0 and above. I can do the identical thing with Chrome Remote DevTools. So if I take an Android 4.4 device and I start up Chrome, so let me see if we can get that working. And oh yeah, you. It's showing me all the, yeah, I can't do that there. It's not enabled for this particular app, but it is showing me all the inspectable devices on it. So you see I've got some web pages that are open. So on an Android 4.4 device, I can actually, you know, bring up Chrome DevTools Now this is just looking in a browser, but so I don't know what's on this thing here, but you know, and I can do everything that I would do with a browser, except that I'm doing it against the entity, against the app that's running on the device here. Same thing that we were doing with the Crosswalk, except that we're limited to 4.4. Problem is, with 4.4, the web view is substantially different than what's in 4.0 through 3 and Android 2. So you may get things working great on 4.4 and discover they don't work worth shit on you know, prior versions. So that's one of the drawbacks. But that hopefully that'll be changing. So that is that. Those were all of the different pieces and parts I wanted to go through. If there's any more questions, we can go from there. Yes. So the XDK, if the question is, are our tools tied to any particular version of PhoneGap? We have a couple different, there's, by the way, there's other features to the XDK that I didn't show you. There's, you know, there's layout stuff, there's build services here, which is really kind of what you're referring to, and then there's some services. So there's other parts. I just concentrate on the debug. The build part, right now, if you do one of these Cordova builds, it's going to build against Cordova 3.3. Then when that gets revved, it'll probably go to a 3.5. So we don't give you the ability to select the particular version of the Cordova framework. When we start enabling plugins, you'll have the ability to select particular versions of plugins, but not the underlying Cordova framework. However, you can take, if you want to use CLI, so the tool is designed to accommodate use of other tools to complement them, not to replace them. So if you want to use CLI locally, either Cordova or PhoneGap CLI, you can do that, and then you can bring it in and you can do debugging using these mechanisms that I just showed you here with your CLI app, because from an HTML5 perspective, it's the same stuff. And you can actually, in fact, I've got that I used CLI to generate the iOS version of it, for example, and so this app is actually a CLI app as well as an XDK app at same sources. So the answer is yes and no. Depends on how you go about doing it. Anything else? Yes. So the question is there a way basically to deal with custom plugins or third-party plugins that are outside the standard set, either in the emulator or through the other mechanisms, a way to get them in there so you can debug an app with those pieces in it? And the answer is today only by actually building the app and, say, inserting Winery or using Chrome, you know, Android 4.4 with remote Chrome or something like that. We are looking at ways to be able to build, if you will, an emulator version of your plugin, so that you could do some level of simulation within the emulator, within the Ripple emulator. That's something we're looking at. That's not a promise that anything like that would show up, but we would like it would be nice to be able to offer something like that. Another alternative would be to provide a way to do like a custom container build. So you could do something like the app preview that I showed, so you could make your own version of app preview that has your custom stuff in. Again, that's just something that's being talked about. Nothing that I could say would actually be delivered at this point. But those are some of the ideas that have been thrown out. So we definitely want to make this process easier. Another thing that we've been looking at is there's an open source project that has to do with debugging remotely, how you can take an iOS device and debug it remotely with Safari. Well, there's an open source project that tries to translate it into a form where you can do that with Chrome. So the Chrome would connect to your Safari, your iOS device. And so we'd like to, if that actually works, that's something we would like to bring in as well, so that you could have like this tethered, rich debug environment there. But again, if it works, we'll try to get it in there. If it's not something that's workable, then
So currently you cannot debug iOS devices.
only with with this tool, the way that you can do it is just with the app preview and the winery connection. You can, if you've got, you could do the build, and you could hook it up if you got a Mac. And you're in Safari, you could debug it that way. So you could take an app that you built here and debug it with the Safari Web Inspector. But we don't have a way to do that more automatically for you right now. But we are definitely looking into that. Okay? Thank you very much.